The story begins with the ringing of the bell, signaling the end of classes. Kanata, our protagonist, gathers his belongings while briefly glancing at the students around him. As he steps out of the classroom, a breathtaking girl stops him with an unexpected request. She asks if they can walk home together. It's none other than the girl sitting next to him, whose stunning beauty always draws attention. Her question catches him off guard, but despite his nervousness, he agrees. As they part ways, she suddenly remembers she left her bag behind and rushes back to retrieve it, leaving Kanata waiting. Meanwhile, a student leans in through the classroom window and teasingly asks if he is her boyfriend. Staying composed, Kanata clarifies that they are just childhood friends. This response excites the boys, as they see it as a sign that they still have a chance with her. When the girl returns with her bag in hand, she barely takes a few steps before a group of young men swarms around her, each one eagerly inviting her somewhere. Their admiration and nervousness are obvious, yet she politely declines all their offers. However, her discomfort is evident. Her irresistible beauty ensures that every interaction becomes a public spectacle, and her popularity is both undeniable and inescapable. Watching this unfold, Kanata reflects on the constant attention she receives. As they finally walk home together, Chito, his childhood friend, wears a clearly irritated expression. With a sigh of frustration, she confesses that she's tired of boys approaching her just to stare at her chest, something that deeply bothers her. Walking beside her, Kanata remains silent, offering only a faint smile as he loses himself in thought. Noticing his distant attitude, Chito asks what's on his mind, but he doesn't respond right away. Deep inside, he wrestles with a truth he has long kept hidden: he is in love with her. Unlike Chito, who is brimming with popularity and charisma, Kanata sees himself as insignificant, almost invisible. This contrast between them makes him feel like a mere insect. He wants to confess his feelings, but the fear of rejection and worse, losing her friendship, holds him back. As he struggles to find the courage to speak, a shooting star streaks across the sky, an unusual sight for that time of day. Acting on impulse, Kanata makes a ridiculous wish to understand Chito's feelings, just like in a dating simulation game. It's a foolish wish, and he knows it won't come true. However, the next morning, as he steps out of his room and greets his mother, he notices something strange. A floating bar appears beside her, identical to the affection meters from visual novels he knows so well. The fantasy has become reality. Kanata's mother, noticing his intense stare, blushes and asks why he's looking at her that way. Feeling awkward, he quickly looks away and insists it's nothing. But as his eyes wander, he sees that even the family dog has a floating meter, almost full, just like his mother's. Dismissing it as a hallucination, Kanata hurries to school. Along the way, he realizes that only girls seem to have these meters. They don't appear above strangers or male students, but every girl has one, each displaying a different level. The truth is undeniable: these bars represent love meters, and everything points to this being a direct result of his wish from the night before. While still processing this bizarre discovery, Kanata's classmate Mikasa greets him with a cheerful good morning. Finding his gaze on her unusual, she asks why he's staring. Her affection meter is about halfway full, which seems like a normal level for someone he's familiar with. Curious, he tries to touch the floating bar, but his hand goes right through it. Not wanting to appear strange, he quickly covers up by pretending to remove something from her hair. Mikasa, flustered, thanks him, and to his shock, her meter rises almost to full. Stunned, Kanata continues to stare in disbelief. Sensing his reaction, Mikasa asks if something is wrong. Nervously, he stammers that it's nothing while desperately trying to process what just happened. At that moment, an irritated voice calls out from behind him. Turning around, he sees another classmate glaring at him. Her meter, which had been at a normal level, suddenly drops. With a look of disdain, she demands to know what he's doing at someone else's seat. Panicking, Kanata quickly apologizes, but he has already realized something crucial: he can now clearly see how girls truly feel about him. Amidst his confusion, someone enters the classroom and greets him. Kanata instantly recognizes the voice: it's Chito. His heart races as he turns around, eager to see her meter and find out the level of her affection for him. When she greeted him with a radiant smile, Kanata was momentarily mesmerized. But as he glanced at her meter, his heart sank. It was nearly empty, and a thick, strange liquid dripped from it. A wave of nervousness and unease washed over him, hitting him like a punch to the gut. The meter revealed a reality he hadn't wanted to see, and in that moment, Kanata feared this marked the end of his love life. Dazed, he slumped into his seat, lost in thought even as the school bell rang. He barely reacted, his mind consumed with one unsettling question: had Chito only tolerated him all this time because they were childhood friends? His doubts deepened until she approached him, noticing his low energy. Concerned, she pointed out that he looked depressed and asked if something was bothering him. Feeling uncomfortable, Kanata quickly dismissed it, saying it was nothing, though deep down, he knew it was the meter beside her that weighed on his mind. Seeing his discouragement, Chito felt compelled to lift his spirits. She admitted she didn't know what was wrong, but she wanted to see him more cheerful because she liked it when he was full of energy. To Kanata, her words felt forced, making him view her differently. He couldn't shake the feeling that the meter had tainted everything. Still, not wanting to burden her, he reassured her that he was fine. But Chito wasn't convinced. She pressed further, asking if he was free after class. Later that day, the two sat on a park bench near the school. Kanata, still shaken, quietly ate his ice cream. Curious, Chito asked why he had chosen that flavor. He explained that it was a limited edition, which piqued her interest, though, in reality, he wasn't even sure if he wanted to eat it. Amused, Chito asked if she could have a taste. Feeling slightly uncomfortable, Kanata hesitated but ultimately let her try a spoonful. After tasting it, Chito's face lit up as she exclaimed how delicious it was. Wanting to return the favor, she scooped some of her own ice cream and playfully held the spoon out to him, telling him to open his mouth. Flustered, Kanata stammered that he needed to mentally prepare himself, but before he could react, Chito ate the spoonful herself instead. Laughing, she explained that it was just a joke and asked if it had at least cheered him up. Kanata pouted, calling it unfair, but Chito, still giggling, admitted she just wanted to tease him a little. She said she preferred seeing him act like his usual self. Playfully pointing at his nose, she added that she liked him better when he was being natural. Kanata was taken aback. Her affectionate behavior didn't make sense when her meter was so low. It left him confused, and the image of that strange, nearly empty meter kept spinning in his mind like an unsolvable puzzle. As the day came to an end, they said their goodbyes, agreeing to meet again the next day. Kanata walked away, but behind him, Chito's expression darkened. Back in her room, she sat in the dim light, quietly whispering Kanata's name over and over. Around her, the space was filled with photos of him, along with mementos from their time together. Tears welled in her eyes as she wondered why he never seemed to notice her or pay her the attention she so desperately craved. Then, the truth was revealed: Chito's love meter had always been functioning, but her feelings for Kanata were so intense and overwhelming that the meter couldn't properly register them. Through quiet sobs, she vowed that, one way or another, she would make him notice her. For Kanata, the love meter could either be a guiding force, like Cupid's arrow, or his greatest curse. The next day, his mind was still occupied with what to do about Chito's love meter. Compared to Toyotomi's, which was already quite low, Chito's seemed even worse. He began to worry that having such low meters could negatively impact the lives of the people around him. He specifically considered Toyotomi, whose meter was the second lowest. What if her growing indifference turned into outright hostility? Determined to improve his relationships and create a more positive atmosphere, Kanata decided to focus on raising Toyotomi's love meter. With that goal in mind, he approached her, only for her to respond with visible discomfort. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. With an overly cheerful smile, Kanata suddenly asked what her favorite food was. Without waiting for a response, he enthusiastically began listing his own favorites, information she definitely hadn't asked for. That attempt fell flat, so he tried again in the next class. Hoping to engage her, he started telling an elaborate story about something exciting that had happened to him the day before. Though Toyotomi seemed momentarily surprised, Kanata quickly realized she wasn't interested. Undeterred, he continued his efforts throughout the day, repeatedly trying to strike up conversations with her. However, his persistence only irritated her, and he watched in horror as her love meter dropped even further. Eventually, Toyotomi reached her limit. She turned to him, visibly annoyed, and demanded, "Do you have a problem?" Kanata stammered an apology, but she firmly told him to stop bothering her. After that, the rest of the school day passed without further incidents. As he walked home, Kanata reflected on his failed attempts. He had only wanted to improve his relationship with Toyotomi, but now he wasn't sure if he had made things worse. Kanata felt more than just disappointment at seeing his affection meter so low. He wished that his inaction actually bothered him. As he walked home, he passed by a familiar park, which brought back memories of playing there with Chosa when they were kids. However, his thoughts were soon interrupted by the sound of sobbing. A little girl was crying, having scraped her knee while playing. Being naturally helpful, Kanata approached her, carefully cleaned the wound, and applied a bandage. Curious, the little girl asked if he was a pharmacist. Kanata instead asked if she could move her leg and whether it still hurt. With boundless energy, she confirmed that it did and then eagerly asked him to take her home. Despite her enthusiasm, Kanata gently held her hand and agreed, all the while feeling that she strangely reminded him of someone. When they arrived at her house, the little girl excitedly announced her return to her older sister, who immediately scolded her for taking too long. That was when both the sister and Kanata froze in surprise. He suddenly realized why the child had seemed so familiar. Moments later, the older sister, Toyotomi, thanked him for bringing her little sister home. Kanata acknowledged her gratitude and was about to leave when the girl, now identified as Mashiro, stopped him and invited him to stay for dinner. Before he could decline, he mentioned how delicious his sister's cooking was, prompting Toyotomi to sigh. She offered that if Kanata wanted to eat before leaving, he could, though she wasn't sure whether he'd like her cooking. However, the slight rise of the affection bar next to her contradicted her uncertainty. Feeling like he had gained a bit of affection, Kanata accepted Mashiro's invitation. Soon, he found himself watching Toyotomi, who was completely focused on preparing the meal. As he observed her, he couldn't help but notice a distinctly feminine side to her. That was when Toyotomi interrupted his thoughts, telling him to go wait in the living room instead of staring at her, as it was distracting. Before long, a perfectly prepared plate of curry was placed in front of him. Kanata took a bite with enthusiasm, instantly amazed by the incredible flavor. He praised Toyotomi for her cooking skills, remarking that she was truly impressive. She explained that she often took care of the household chores since their parents came home late. This revelation surprised Kanata even more. He was already impressed by her cooking, but now he learned she was skilled in various domestic tasks as well. He commented that she was extraordinarily talented, causing Toyotomi to grow flustered and insist that he was exaggerating. Meanwhile, Mashiro happily ate her meal, making a mess in the process. Toyotomi gently wiped her little sister's mouth, displaying a tender side Kanata hadn't expected. This dinner made him rethink his initial impression of Toyotomi. Though he had found her intimidating at first, her true personality was warm and caring. He realized that the saying was true, you can't judge a book by its cover. As the night grew later, Kanata knew it was time to go home. He thanked Toyotomi once again for the wonderful meal and prepared to leave, but then he noticed Mashiro sleeping soundly on his lap. Something caught his eye. Her happiness bar was now completely full. Moved by the sight, he gently stroked her head. When he looked up, he found Toyotomi watching him intently, an affectionate expression on her face. At that moment, he also realized that his own happiness bar had increased significantly. Puzzled by her gaze and his reaction, he ultimately attributed it to the strong bond between Toyotomi and her younger sister. Given the situation, he decided to stay a little longer. Later, as he stood by the door, Kanata once again expressed his gratitude for the meal. Toyotomi, however, remained quiet, visibly embarrassed by his compliments. Just before he could leave, little Mashiro ran to hug him tightly, her eyes filled with tears as she asked him to come back. Seeing this, Toyotomi hesitantly added that he should visit again, though she immediately seemed flustered for saying it. She quickly justified her words by mentioning that her sister liked him so much. With that, she said goodbye, reminding him that they'd see each other at school the next day. Kanata responded in kind, but he soon realized he couldn't leave. Mashiro was still clinging to him, refusing to let go. Meanwhile, Chito was rushing home, needing to return quickly. As she passed by Toyotomi's house, she happened to see Kanata standing there. He was smiling and looking at Toyotomi, who responded with a shy and flustered gesture. Chito was completely taken aback. Watching the scene unfold, she couldn't help but wonder what on earth they were doing together at that hour. Was this the scene of a boyfriend saying goodbye to his girlfriend? The thought made her grip the poster she was holding more tightly. Even though Kanata had done nothing wrong, Chito's affection bar suddenly began to rise, filling with the strange liquid that represented her overflowing emotions. From the depths of her soul, Chito cursed Toyotomi, calling her a thieving cat. Her thoughts swirled endlessly, filled with unease about the nature of their relationship. Were they close enough to visit each other? The uncertainty knotted her, sending her mind into a spiral of doubts and assumptions, a storm of emotions threatening to consume her focus. Her troubled thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the arrival of someone with a clear and energetic voice. It was Kanata, entering the classroom with his usual warm smile, bringing a light and friendly atmosphere with him. Seeing him, Chito quickly rose from her seat and approached to greet him. She wanted to ask about what she had witnessed the previous day, but just as she gathered the courage to speak, Toyotomi appeared with a serene smile. She greeted Kanata using an affectionate honorific, which made Chito's stomach tighten. She couldn't look away as Toyotomi addressed Kanata warmly, calling him by his first name, Suri. That familiarity echoed in Chito's mind, intensifying her doubts and leaving her with an unsettling feeling that followed her for the rest of the day. The scene left Chito deeply unsettled, unsure of how to react. Finally, with a trembling voice, she asked Kanata what kind of relationship he had with Toyotomi. He cheerfully replied that they had recently become friends, which gave Chito a brief sense of relief. However, her mind quickly began to wander, imagining everything from a simple friendship to something much closer. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, she nearly spiraled into a breakdown. Kanata, noticing her troubled expression, asked if she was okay. Meanwhile, another classmate watched from a distance, feeling a pang of jealousy at their closeness. She longed to approach Kanata and connect with him but struggled to find a topic they had in common. At the same time, her thoughts drifted to a particular memory, the moment when Kanata had touched her hair. That moment lingered in her mind, replaying over and over. As the school day continued, she realized she couldn't take her eyes off him, unable to stop watching for even a second. It was obvious, even to herself, how much she was drawn to him. Seizing an opportunity to get closer, she asked Kanata about the beautiful pen he was holding so proudly. He explained that it reminded him of Mamio, his little dog, which was why he had bought it. Mikasa was surprised to learn that he had a pet. Excitedly, she mentioned that she took care of a golden retriever. Kanata's face lit up with enthusiasm. He commented that her dog must be adorable and that he'd love to meet and hug it. Mikasa, smiling genuinely, told him he could whenever he had the chance. The next day, Mikasa went for a walk with her dog, enjoying the beautiful weather. As she strolled, she hummed happily, recalling how much joy she had felt after talking to Kanata the day before. With a hopeful heart, she briefly entertained the thought of running into him again by chance. However, she quickly dismissed it as wishful thinking. Just then, she heard someone calling her name. Turning around, she saw Kanata, also out walking his dog. With a friendly smile, he commented on what a coincidence it was. Despite maintaining a calm demeanor, Mikasa felt a rush of excitement inside, convinced that this meeting was fate. Her affection meter, displayed beside her, increased significantly. She then proudly introduced her dog, the one she had mentioned before, and revealed that his name was Chocolate. Kanata, intrigued, asked if she had chosen the name herself. Mikasa nodded but couldn't resist asking how he had guessed. With a playful smile, Kanata responded that the name was simple and sweet, just like her personality. His words struck Mikasa deeply, and she quickly turned away to hide her embarrassment. How could he say things like that so naturally? Did he talk like this to everyone? Her imagination ran wild, inspired by a manga she had read the day before, a story where two dog owners became friends, which eventually led to romance. Meanwhile, behind her, Kanata was puzzled. His affection meter was rising, even though he hadn't done anything. He wasn't sure why this was happening, but its rapid increase concerned him. He reminded himself that his heart belonged to Chito, and he needed to be careful. The last thing he wanted was for Mikasa to get too close, potentially creating future conflicts. With that thought in mind, he resolved to keep his distance. Kanata asked Masasa if he could play with the dog for a bit. She agreed, and our protagonist began running alongside the dog. Suddenly, he deliberately fell to the ground and started crying uncontrollably, intending to make Mikasa feel disappointed in him. His plan worked. Mikasa's affection meter dropped because, deep down, she felt let down by how dramatically he was reacting to something so trivial. It didn't align with the heroic figures she admired in manga. Noticing the decrease in her affection meter, Kanata realized his strategy was effective. With a neutral expression, he deduced that Mikasa was quite emotional and that he could manipulate her affection level this way. Shortly after, Mikasa invited him to play with the dog. Excited, Kanata dashed forward, causing Mikasa to trip and fall. He quickly caught her before she hit the ground and asked if she was okay. Embarrassed, Mikasa reassured him she was fine, though her face turned red. That's when Kanata noticed her reaction. She was blushing and stammering. He then asked her to hold his hand to prevent her from falling again. Suddenly, he saw that Mikasa's affection meter had skyrocketed to 100%. Overwhelmed by how out of control things had become, Kanata tried to reverse the situation by ignoring Mikasa's response. However, this had the opposite effect. She mistook his behavior for shyness, which only made her fall for him even more. This triggered the appearance of a second meter, which was already nearly halfway full. Faced with this unexpected turn of events, Kanata panicked internally, frustrated that he couldn't figure out how to lower the meter. He had no idea how to understand girls. Meanwhile, Cheetos was running quickly, but after a while, she stopped by a railing to catch her breath and take a sip of water. At that moment, she witnessed an unexpected scene. Mikasa was lying on top of Kanata in what appeared to be an embrace. Startled, Cheetos quickly hid behind a tree, observing the situation with curiosity. Was there some kind of relationship between Kanata and Mikasa? She watched as the two of them lay peacefully on the grass, smiling at each other. This only left her more confused and overwhelmed. She knew she had to do something but had no idea how to handle the situation. Kanata gave off the impression of constantly trying to impress girls, while Mikasa's expression suggested the same. Meanwhile, Cheetos, who had no real involvement in the situation, was fuming behind the tree. She cursed Kanata for being such a smooth talker. On his part, Kanata suddenly turned around, sensing an ominous presence. This time, he managed to catch a glimpse of someone sneaking behind the tree. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was Cheetos, and he was taken aback by how irritated she looked. What shocked him the most, however, was the bizarre meter hovering next to her. It had the face of an Akuma, a demon. Kanata was baffled by what was happening with these strange affection meters.